What's up? You look down.
Well, to tell you the truth, can I talk to you guys?
To tell you the truth, why not?
General Torgerson at Logistics and Support.
When MASH became one of the most beloved shows in television history, Gary Burghoff's character, Corporal Radar O'Reilly, quickly stole America's heart. With his boyish innocence, quirky humor, and those unforgettable radar-like instincts, he became the soul of the 4077th. Fans couldn't imagine the show without him, until one shocking moment when he walked away. No warning, no build-up, just gone. For years, rumors swirled. Some said Gary couldn't handle the fame. Others claimed he clashed with the cast. A few whispered about money disputes and behind-the-scenes tension that pushed him out. But at 82, Gary Burghoff has finally broken his silence. And what he reveals is both heartbreaking and deeply human. It turns out, the truth wasn't about ego, contracts, or feuds. It was about something far more personal. Something that cut to the very core of who Gary was as a man, not just an actor. He made a choice that cost him his career, but ultimately saved his soul. This is the untold story of why Gary Burghoff really quit MASH. The emotional truth he's been carrying for decades, and how that one painful decision changed his life forever. What he's revealing now will make you see both Radar and Gary in a way you never have before. When MASH first aired in 1972, no one expected it to become one of the most iconic shows in television history. The mix of comedy and tragedy, set against the harsh backdrop of war, gave audiences something unique: laughter in the face of pain. But among the colorful characters, it was Gary Burghoff's Radar O'Reilly who stood out the most. With his boyish charm and uncanny ability to anticipate what his commanding officers wanted before they asked, Radar was the glue that held the 4077th together. Gary's portrayal of Radar wasn't just acting, it was authenticity. He brought innocence and warmth to a show surrounded by chaos and bloodshed. His performance was so natural that fans believed he was Radar in real life. But behind that cheerful grin was a young man quietly battling pressure, loneliness, and personal struggles that few ever saw. Before MASH, Gary had already played Radar in the 1970 film version, directed by Robert Altman. His performance caught the attention of producers when CBS decided to adapt the movie into a series. But while most of the movie's cast didn't return, Gary did, becoming the only actor to make the transition from film to TV. From day one, he captured hearts and brought light to every episode. Yet success came at a cost. The long hours on set, the constant filming, and the immense public attention began to take a toll. Gary was a perfectionist, deeply sensitive, deeply emotional, and working in Hollywood's high-pressure environment slowly started to wear him down. Adding to the struggle was the fact that Gary's personal life was unraveling. His marriage was suffering, and he was missing precious time with his family. As the show's ratings soared, Gary's private world was quietly falling apart. He later admitted that the joy he once felt for acting had faded, replaced by exhaustion and guilt. But what made it even harder was that MASH wasn't just a show to Gary. It was a family. The cast had grown close, and walking away wasn't a simple decision. He loved his co-stars deeply, especially Alan Alda and Mike Farrell, who often offered him emotional support. Still, no matter how much comfort he found on set, nothing could fill the void he felt at home. By the late 1970s, the pressure became unbearable. Gary began to show signs of stress. He'd lose focus during filming, sometimes appear distant, and was emotionally drained. The show's producers noticed, but didn't realize just how close Gary was to breaking. He tried to keep up the cheerful front that fans expected from Radar, but the weight of fame and family responsibility was pulling him in two opposite directions. In a later interview, Gary confessed that fame wasn't what he had hoped for. "I didn't want to be a star," he said softly. "I just wanted to be loved and respected." That statement revealed a truth that few knew at the time. Gary Burghoff wasn't leaving for money or ego. He was leaving because his heart couldn't take it anymore. He felt trapped between two worlds, the laughter and applause of millions who adored Radar, and the quiet, aching loneliness of his real life. It was a battle he was destined to lose if he didn't make a change. And when the breaking point finally came, Gary made the most difficult choice of his life: to walk away from one of television's greatest shows at the height of its success. But what happened next, the real reason behind his departure, would reveal a man driven not by career ambition, but by love, loss, and a desperate need to reclaim himself. Gary Burghoff's decision to leave MASH came as a shock to everyone. Fans, co-stars, even the producers who had worked with him for nearly a decade. For many viewers, Radar O'Reilly wasn't just another character. He was the soul of the 4077th. His quiet innocence and unwavering loyalty symbolized the heart of the series. So, when Gary walked away, people were desperate to understand why. At first, rumors swirled. Some claimed that he wanted a higher salary. Others believed he was clashing with the producers or cast. But the truth, as Gary later revealed, was far more personal and heartbreaking. It wasn't about fame, ego, or money. It was about love, exhaustion, and the overwhelming cost of being away from his family. During the height of MASH, Gary's marriage was falling apart. He had a young daughter at home, and every day on set was another day missed from her life. The long filming schedule meant 12-hour days, 5 days a week, leaving him emotionally and physically drained. By the time he returned home, he was too tired to be a husband or a father. He once admitted in an interview, "I realized I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Radar was loved by everyone, but I was becoming unhappy and distant. My family deserved more than what was left of me after a day of filming." That raw honesty showed that Gary wasn't driven by ambition. He was driven by conscience. He knew that staying might mean greater fame, more awards, and more money, but it would also mean losing the people who truly mattered to him. Still, leaving wasn't easy. The cast and crew of MASH had become his second family. Alan Alda, Mike Farrell, Loretta Swit, and Jamie Farr all tried to convince him to stay. They loved him deeply and couldn't imagine the show without Radar. But Gary was firm in his decision. He needed to go, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. When the time came to film his final episode, titled Goodbye, Radar, the entire set was emotional. The farewell scenes weren't just acting. They were real. The tears that streamed down the cast's faces came from the heart. Gary himself later confessed that the goodbye felt painfully authentic. "It wasn't just Radar leaving the 4077th, he said. "It was me saying goodbye to a family that had meant everything." The audience felt that pain, too. The two-part episode remains one of the most emotional moments in television history. Viewers around the world cried as Radar walked away, carrying his teddy bear, a symbol of his innocence and purity, leaving behind the camp that had defined his life for years. After his departure, Gary hoped for peace and normalcy. He wanted to focus on his family, rebuild his marriage, and find balance. But Hollywood rarely lets go that easily. Offers kept coming in, and fans couldn't understand why he stayed out of the spotlight. For Gary, though, stepping away was never about abandoning fame. It was about rediscovering himself. Yet, even as he tried to move forward, the shadow of Radar O'Reilly followed him everywhere. People couldn't separate the character from the man. Fans would approach him, expecting the cheerful, boyish clerk, unaware that behind that familiar smile was someone still healing. Gary struggled for years with the pressure of living up to a role that had defined him. He did occasional guest appearances and small projects, But nothing ever reached the same heights as MASH. He didn't want it to. In his heart, Radar's story had ended beautifully, and he had no desire to tarnish that memory. Still, life after MASH was not without its trials. Financial difficulties, personal loss, and long periods of isolation tested him deeply. But through it all, Gary never regretted his decision. He once said, "Leaving was painful, but necessary. I didn't want to lose myself in the noise of Hollywood." Little did anyone know, though, that behind Gary's quiet life away from fame, a hidden truth would soon emerge. One that revealed the emotional and spiritual transformation that followed his time on MASH. After leaving MASH, Gary Burghoff retreated from the spotlight that had once defined his life. For many stars, stepping away from a hit show meant obscurity. But for Gary, it was liberation. He wasn't interested in chasing roles or fame anymore. He wanted peace. Still, the sudden silence after years of chaos was jarring. He went from the constant buzz of cameras and fan mail to long, quiet days at home. For the first time in years, he had time to think. And that's when the weight of everything he'd sacrificed began to hit him. He tried to rebuild his family life, but the wounds were deep. His marriage had already been strained by years of absence and pressure. Despite his efforts, the relationship eventually fell apart, leaving him heartbroken. Gary loved his daughter more than anything, and he made her his top priority, vowing to never let Hollywood take him away from her again. The years that followed were marked by a search for identity. Gary wasn't just Radar anymore, but he also wasn't sure who Gary Burghoff really was outside of that role. Many actors experience this after long-running shows, the confusion of being loved for a version of themselves that only exists on screen. He explored new passions: painting, wildlife conservation, and music. Few people knew that Gary was a talented artist, specializing in wildlife paintings that captured the same quiet sensitivity that made his acting so memorable. His artwork began to sell, and he found joy in creating something that didn't require scripts or cameras, just heart and patience. He also spent time playing music. Before MASH, Gary had been a drummer, and even played with future stars like the legendary bandmates of the Beatles during their early days in the U.S. His love for rhythm never faded, and he often said that drumming helped him express emotions he couldn't put into words. But despite his efforts to live a peaceful life, Gary couldn't completely escape the shadow of his past. Fans still recognized him everywhere he went. Strangers would approach him in grocery stores, airports, even small-town cafes, calling him Radar, and thanking him for bringing warmth to their lives. While he was always kind and humble, there were days when the attention reminded him of the life he'd tried to leave behind. In interviews, Gary often reflected on the emotional cost of fame. "People see the success," he once said, "but they don't see what it takes from you. Your privacy, your energy, your relationships. It's like a beautiful gift that slowly becomes a cage." Despite the challenges, Gary remained grateful for his time on MASH. He credited the show's writing and cast for creating a sense of realism that went beyond traditional comedy. The series had tackled serious issues: war, trauma, loss, through humor and heart. Gary felt proud to have been part of something that didn't just entertain, but helped people heal. In his later years, Gary found comfort in faith and simplicity. He lived quietly, far from Hollywood, in a small community where few cared about television fame. Friends described him as gentle and deeply spiritual, a man who had learned to value peace over applause. He also used his platform to support causes he cared about, particularly animal welfare and environmental preservation. Gary often said that animals had a purity of spirit that humans could learn from. In many ways, his life mirrored Radar's: compassionate, kind, and guided by empathy. Yet there was one thing that Gary never got over: the emotional bond he shared with the cast of MASH. He stayed in touch with many of them over the years, particularly Alan Alda, who once said, "Gary was the heart of MASH. You could take away the jokes, the surgeries, the chaos, but without Radar, the show wouldn't have had its soul." Hearing those words meant the world to Gary. He had left at a time when people thought he was giving up everything, but in truth, he had found something far more important: himself. Still, before the world could close his chapter entirely, Gary had one more truth to share, one final, emotional revelation about what really happened behind the scenes of MASH, and why his goodbye was far more painful than anyone ever knew. As the years passed, Gary Burghoff largely stayed out of Hollywood's limelight, but time has a way of softening even the deepest scars. When he finally spoke openly about his departure from MASH, his honesty left fans both heartbroken and inspired. For decades, people had speculated that his exit was fueled by creative differences or contract disputes. Yet Gary revealed that the real reason was far more human. He confessed that behind the laughter and camaraderie on set, he was struggling with something invisible: severe exhaustion and depression. Fame had taken a toll on his emotional well-being, and every day became harder to face. "I loved MASH," he said softly in a rare interview, "but I didn't love who I was becoming because of it." Gary explained that he had tried to push through, determined not to disappoint anyone. But as the seasons went on, the pressure intensified. The demands of the role, the expectation to stay cheerful, and the heartbreak of missing his daughter's milestones finally broke him. When his marriage began to fall apart, Gary realized that no amount of success could fix the emptiness he felt inside. Leaving MASH wasn't a choice made overnight. It was the only way he could survive emotionally. Yet, stepping away from Hollywood didn't mean his journey was over. For years, he wrestled with the fear that he had disappointed fans and colleagues. He worried that walking away would make people forget him. But the opposite happened. Instead of fading, his portrayal of Radar O'Reilly became timeless, a symbol of innocence, kindness, and humanity in a world obsessed with chaos. When asked if he ever regretted leaving, Gary's answer was simple but profound. "No, because Radar didn't belong to me. He belonged to everyone who needed hope. I just had the honor of being his voice." That humility defined Gary throughout his later years. Even when MASH celebrated its anniversaries or reunions, he approached them with quiet gratitude, never seeking attention. His fellow castmates spoke fondly of him, describing how deeply he cared for others. Loretta Swit once said, "Gary was special. He had this purity about him that never went away, even when the cameras stopped rolling." As Gary aged, he found peace in solitude. He spent his days surrounded by nature, sketching birds and painting wildlife. His art reflected the same warmth and empathy that once radiated from Radar. Fans who discovered his work were astonished by its emotional depth. Each painting told a story. Each brushstroke seemed to echo the gentle voice of the young corporal who had touched millions. But Gary's later reflections carried a quiet sadness too. He admitted that fame had cost him dearly, not just in his personal life, but in his understanding of happiness. "When you're famous," he said, "people think you have everything. But sometimes, the more people love you, the less you feel you belong to yourself." In his final public appearances, Gary spoke with honesty about mental health, forgiveness, and rediscovering joy. He encouraged others to prioritize family and inner peace over career ambitions. "Success means nothing," he said, "if you lose yourself along the way." Looking back now, fans see Gary Burghoff's story as one of courage, not just for the role he played, but for the strength it took to walk away from the very thing that defined him. MASH made him a legend, but his decision to put love and sanity above fame made him truly human. When asked how he'd like to be remembered, Gary didn't mention awards or accolades. He simply said, as someone who cared about people, about animals, about doing the right thing, even when it hurt. Today, as viewers revisit old MASH episodes, that spirit lives on. Every time Radar appears on screen, with that shy smile, that gentle voice, that big heart, it's not just a character they see. It's Gary himself, forever reminding the world that kindness, above all, never fades.